So welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your refreshments. Some smiles and nods. That's great. Well, as I said this morning, we now come in the second part of the programme to a very special part of the programme, and that's an opportunity to hear a first-hand account from someone who actually lived through the Holocaust. Our speaker has a truly remarkable story to tell. She was just 6 years old when the Nazis marched into Poland and her idyllic childhood was turned upside down. To hear all about the childhood and what happened afterwards and how eventually she came to this country and became an international concert pianist, would you please give a very warm welcome to Nelly Ben Or.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. I have to invite you to use as much of your imagination as you can, because it's a story of a childhood very different to whatever childhood you may have had in this country. So I hope that I can speak to your imagination. You can represent to yourself what I will tell you about. As you have heard, I come from Poland, and I was born in the early 1930s. Take your shoes off and count how old I am now. I'm 84. And I was sort of between 6 and 7 when Hitler invaded Poland in 1939. This is a picture of my family. My mother, my father, and a sister who was much older than myself. She was 8 years older, and the little girl is myself, probably aged 5 in that photograph, on a holiday in the mountains of Poland. Not terribly long before our lives were totally, almost totally destroyed, actually. I understand that you have learned something about the history of the Holocaust, that it had to do with the Nazi ideology and propaganda, that anybody who was of the Jewish faith had to be exterminated. The whole of Europe had to get rid of all Jewish people. And Hitler started it, first of all, in Germany, and then, as he decided, which was his plan, to conquer Europe, to conquer more than Europe, the first country that he invaded was Poland, with whom Germany has a border. I don't know if you were told this, but Hitler made an agreement with the ruler of Soviet Russia, Stalin, that they will divide Poland between themselves, and the western part Hitler will take over, and the eastern part Stalin will. As it happened, my family came from the eastern part of Poland, a large town which now belongs to the Ukraine, called Lvov. Currently, they call it in their language, they call it Lviv. It was a large regional town in southeastern Poland, and I was born in that town. And my family consisted, as you will see, of the parents and 2 girls. Initially, we, in the first year, about year and a half or so, we were not under the Nazi rule. So we led a more or less normal life. And then when Hitler decided to wage a war on Russia and go east, he took over the rest of Poland, And this is when the Jewish population began to suffer, because the plan was, as I said, to eradicate the existence of any people of Jewish faith. The first thing that happened, we were marked by being given an order to wear a band, a white band with the Star of David, which is the symbol of Judaism, actually, a star of King David from the Old Testament, from the Bible. And everybody who was from a Jewish family, even a little one, up to old age, everybody had to wear this to be marked as basically as a candidate for death. And then within a very short time, all Jewish people were herded into an area specially enclosed with high walls covered with broken glass and barbed wire at the top so that nobody could possibly escape. And it was marked as a place where all the Jewish people had to come to live, called the ghetto. We were dispossessed of everything, of our home and everything that we had in our home. But primarily we were dispossessed of personal freedom and treated as subhuman. So we were out of a lovely home that we had in which my mother was a very creative person. She embroidered and painted and made beautiful things, and our home was decorated by lovely pictures that she either embroidered or that she painted, objects that she created through her handiwork. One day, a group of 3 or 4 German officers just stormed into our house, threw us out onto a balcony, and began to help themselves to anything that they liked in our home, and just started taking everything away. And then put us onto trucks and ferried us to this area where we were supposed to be from then on, to the ghetto, where instead of having an apartment to ourselves, we had one room within a house where there were, I think, 3 or 4 other families. Each family had just one room, and in the corridors of the house there were little primus stoves on which people were able to cook whatever food was available, and there was hardly any, because immediately we began to suffer from rather terrible hunger. And one of the most painful memories I have as a girl of that age, I was about between 8 and 9, I think, seeing my father, who particularly suffered from the lack of food, going outside the house. There was a patch of grass, and actually picking grass and eating that. And I realized how much he suffered from being so hungry, so deprived of food. But this was throughout the ghetto. All of us were deprived, as I said, first of all, of our human dignity, of our freedom as human beings, and of the basic necessities of life. So it's very hard for us to actually imagine what it means to be so hungry that you will take a leaf or a bit of grass to feed yourself. But this was the situation. the purpose of gathering all the Jewish people that they wanted to exterminate, to get rid of, to gather them together, so that from this large number, and there were hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people, they were gradually taking groups of them to send them to their death in various ways. You will have heard about death camps, which were organized so that there were gas chambers where people were herded in and locked and killed through gas spread through the chamber. But there were also other ways in which they killed people. They would, for instance, take a whole group of people outside this town into a field, make them dig a huge grave, a huge ditch, and shoot people into it and bury them. Not all were dead. Some were possibly even still conscious. Some were unconscious but still living, but eventually died within that grave. This was another method of barbaric ways of killing people of all ages. Children, middle-aged people, old people, men, women, everybody. So what was happening while we were in the ghetto, that from almost every day, a track of the special forces of the Nazis, the so-called SS, would arrive and storm into buildings and force people out, put them on the track and ferry them out, either to a railway station, central railway station, from which they were taken to one or two of the notorious death camps. One you probably have heard the word Auschwitz, which was in Poland. There was another one called Treblinka. There were 3 or 4 of them where people were killed as a mass. And the word would spread within the ghetto that a raid is coming. And people would try to hide wherever they could find a place of hiding, because we knew that sometimes they would just kill people on the spot in the ghetto, but mainly they wanted to gather as many as possible to ferry them out to their death. And the word was spread, and people would try to hide wherever they could. I remember a moment where in the street where we were, the word came that they are coming, and it was a house with probably previously just occupied by one family, but there were 3 or 4 families in it within the confines of the ghetto. And outside there was an outbuilding, a small outbuilding, and then a fence, and the distance between the wall of the outbuilding and the fence was probably the width of this table. And suddenly I think about 10 or maximum 12 people ran to this space between the building and the fence. And one of the people was a woman with an almost newborn baby, a very, very, very little baby, a few weeks old probably. And she carried the baby, and we crammed into this space so we couldn't be seen from outside, between the building and the fence. And everybody's eyes were on the baby, because if it gave a little squeak, we would be found out and probably immediately destroyed, killed on the spot. And I remember this moment as vividly now, after so many years, as I experienced it then as a little girl. And And everybody looked at the woman holding her baby and watching whether the baby was going to just make a little noise. And we heard them, their heavy military boots, jumping up and down and cursing the wretched Jews. Where are they? And they couldn't find anybody in the building. Eventually they ran out. And the baby didn't make a squeak. That's why I'm still here to tell you the story. And there were moments of that kind, many such moments, while we were in the ghetto, where we managed somehow to escape from being taken out to be executed. My sister was 8 years older than myself, so she was a teenager. And all young people, teenagers of your age and older, were every day taken from the ghetto to a nearby factory which was making things, uniforms, objects for the German army. And they used them simply as available labor. Forced them to, they would take them very early in the morning and bring them back to the ghetto late in the evening, maybe take them at 7 in the morning, bring them back at 8 or 9 in the evening, and the next day again. They used young, healthy people to do work for them. And on one such occasion, my sister was taken. And then was taken day after day for some time. And one day, she didn't come back. And we were absolutely devastated. We asked people who had been with her. They didn't know what happened. What actually happened was that they were trying to fill the right number of to transport to one of these infamous grave digging situations and execute them. And they were gathering people at the railway station of the town, and they arranged them in rows of four people, a sort of long row of groups of 4. And my sister was amongst them. This, of course, I learned only later. And they were waiting for one more track of people to complete the number which they were then going to put on the train, cattle train, by the way, not normal trains, to ferry them outside into the field where they were going to be executed. And the last group of people that arrived on the track, a woman noticed my sister, and she knew my sister, who was went to the same school as the woman's son, the only son that person had, who actually died of a disease a year or something before all this was happening. And she saw my sister, and she virtually hypnotized her. She said, "What are you doing here?" As if my sister could have helped not being there. "Get out." Well, it was an impossible injunction. You can't get out when soldiers stand there with machine guns, watching every move of yours and shoot you at the slightest provocation. But somehow, and of course everybody was wearing this band with the blue star on it. It caused my sister to look for a moment where the guard wasn't quite looking at her, and she stepped back from her row of 4 to the one behind, and then to the one behind that, each time taking a few moments to spot a moment when she could sneak out. And by the time she got to the last row, she waited for a moment and pulled off this band and walked off as if she had nothing to do with all this Jewish group of people. And there was a peasant woman sitting on the platform with a basket of violet posies, selling it to passengers. And my sister just picked up one of these posies of violets, smiled, and walked right out. Nobody stopped her. It was absolutely a miracle, because if they had spotted it, if they had seen her, she would have been shot on the spot. And then she made her way, this was the evening, somehow through the night, through the fields, she walked and somehow got through somewhere a break in the ghetto walls and appeared very, very, very early in the morning in our place. We had all been absolutely devastated because we thought we had lost her, that we will never see her again. And she appeared in a state of such agitation. She said, "We have to get out of here. They can't murder us like this. We've got to get out." And she managed to make contact with somebody outside the ghetto who was a very remarkable man. He was a doctor from Prague, from Czechoslovakia, where he was educated, or the educated classes in the Czech Republic then were educated in German. So he spoke perfect German, and he made it he pretended to be a German, not a Jew, although he was Jewish, and therefore he managed not to be herded into the ghetto. He was outside and did every possible thing to save as many people, to rescue them from being marked out for death. And my sister found a way of contacting him, and it was he who arranged to come at a point where really we were any minute due for transport to death. He arranged to come in the uniform of an SS German officer through the guards. Apparently he walked through the guard at the entrance to the ghetto and cursed the Jews and, threw insults at them, etc., etc., and got hold of, first of all, my sister, and the next day, the same story, he took my mother and myself. I think that he said something about a disease that is spreading, and so he takes this girl and this woman out. And he got us out of the ghetto. And 2 days later, he was coming to get my father. But unfortunately, it was too late. Because the day after he rescued my mother and myself, many men of my father's age, he will have been then in his middle to late 30s, were taken out from that ghetto to a horrific place that used to be a violent sort of prison where they tortured these men and they killed them. This is what I know about the end of my father's life. At that point I was 9. And I didn't know anything about it until many years later, after the war. I discovered some papers after my mother died in her home, which somebody being a witness to the fact that my father died in those circumstances, and that it happened at Christmas time in 1943. So apart from the picture where I can see my father, I have nothing remaining of him in my life, nothing. Well, we came out to the non-Jewish part of the city, and we stayed in the apartment of this doctor who saved us out of the ghetto. And it was decided, he decided, that we must not stay in the same town because we might be recognized, somebody may recognize. And there were people who were actually some people who nobly tried to help the Jewish people, and others who helped the Nazis in their plan to destroy the Jewish people. And it was decided, my mother and this doctor decided that we ought to not stay in our city, but travel to the capital, which was the biggest town in Poland, Warsaw. And we were in southeast of the country. Warsaw is right in the middle of Poland, and that we should travel to Warsaw. And there, one of my mother's siblings, her younger brother, was already in hiding with under false identity, with false papers showing that he was not Jewish, etc., false name and everything. And these sort of false identity papers were arranged for my mother and myself, and separately for my sister also. And we had to travel to Warsaw to find our way there. And my mother's brother was very well off, and he was going to financially help my mother, to support her. Well, I want to tell you about this journey because I think it's a very important something from which we can learn something. My mother brought me to the railway station. This was the evening, about, I still remember it was about 8:30 or so in the evening, to wait for the train that was going to Warsaw. And it was a very long journey from our town to Warsaw. It was an all-night journey. And we stood on the platform, and there was a train on that platform. And as the train began to move off, my mother turned to one of the officials and said, "Oh, when is the train for Warsaw leaving?" And he said, "You've just missed it. This was the one train that goes to Warsaw tonight." Obviously, she must have looked so perplexed and frightened that he wanted to help her in some way. There was a woman with a little girl, missed her train to Warsaw. He said, "You know, the station master is a German, of course. There will be a train at midnight, which is only for German officers, but it's usually more than half empty. If the station master wants, he can put you on that train, and you can travel to Warsaw on that train." My mother didn't want to let on that she's terrified to be put onto a train with the very people who were in charge of killing us. It's into Lion's Den. She sort of allowed herself to be led. He took my hand, took my mother, and said, "Let's go to the office of the station master and ask him to put you on that train." He also asked my mother if she could speak some German. Now, I have to tell you something. There was a colloquial language that the Jewish people used, which stemmed from medieval German, and it began to be called Yiddish. But basically, it was like old German, like English from 12th or 13th century. Wouldn't be the English that you are speaking now. But my mother, in her teens, together with her whole family, she had 6 brothers and sisters. The family moved to Austria because her father found work there, and they lived in Graz, which I think is the second largest city after Vienna in Austria. And they went to school there, and they learned German, and they spoke fluent German. So they spoke, they read, they wrote German, as well as Polish, of course, which was their mother tongue. But to admit that she knew German could have been admitting that maybe that she is Jewish, because the Jews understood German, because they still used the old medieval German amongst themselves. So she said, "Oh, I know 1 or 2 words, perhaps," and that made the station official drag her into the office of the station master, who was very happy to receive somebody that he could speak to, apparently be understood, because Polish people, this wasn't the foreign language in Poland was French, basically, not German. So the non-Jewish people didn't have any knowledge of German. If you had some knowledge of German, you were suspect that you might be Jewish. So he was very happy. Oh, there was a woman who was a little girl. He brought us tea and made us comfortably safe in the confines of his little office. And when the hour came, the train arrived, he put us into a compartment on the train with 4 high-ranking SS officers. These were the people who were the guards and the rulers of the extermination camps, where people were put into gas chambers and killed and tortured, and all the stories that you will have heard about the Holocaust. We arrived there, my mother and myself, and these 4 men in these uniforms. They had a symbol on their hats of a skull and bones, and on their lapels. And for me, they were the picture of death. I was shivering there. We entered into this compartment, and they straight away said, "Oh, this is a long journey. The child should sleep. We will sit on this bench, and she can lie down on the other bench." And one of them took off his coat and covered me with that coat so that I could sleep. Because I was a little girl. It's an all-night journey. The trains weren't fantastically warm. Now think of this. It is the idea that saved my life. The reversal of that idea could have deprived me of my life. Because they didn't think that I was a Jewish girl. I was a child. I was a girl who they wanted to be kind to. She has a long journey ahead of her. We give her space to lie down so she can sleep. We cover her so that she is warm. If their idea was that she is a Jewish girl, I would have been taken out onto the platform and shot, and my mother. I tell this story every time I'm asked to speak to young people like yourselves about my childhood in the Holocaust. I tell this story to make a point that if you have a wrong idea, you're going to do something wrong. If you don't realize that human beings are basically the same, each one of us wishes to be safe, each one of us wants not to be hated, each one of us wants to be accepted for what we are. what color of skin we have, what a particular branch of religion we follow, what language we speak. At the core, we are all human beings. And to decide that one human being, because he was born into a different religion, is wrong or bad, and has to not live, or because he has the different color of skin to myself, or he comes from a different culture, different habits. It was such a dramatic example of stupidity. I mean, why did I have to die? Because I was born to parents who followed a Jewish religion. What did I do? What did my parents do that they had to be exterminated? What did my father do that he had to be tortured and put to death? Why? Because the Germans had this idea, or particularly a certain sect of the Germans, that created this ideology that anybody who follows the Judaic teaching is subhuman, has to be exterminated like rats. But they didn't think that of me and my mother on that occasion, and we arrived next morning at the main station in Warsaw, and there were many people milling around, and we overheard people saying, "Oh, you know that train that came from Lviv last night? They picked up lots of Jews who were trying to escape." And this was the train that moved in front of my mother's eyes, and we missed that train, and we arrived in the safety of our executor, being in the compartment with those who would have executed us, had they known. I think we're coming. I have just sketched a basic a period, which was every day was like a year, because anything could happen. We waited from day to day, from night to night, what is going to happen to us. We knew that the aim was to kill us. How? We knew about Auschwitz because very occasionally some individuals managed to escape. I don't know how, because it was so heavily guarded. So the word spread that it is a place of absolute horror, where people were starving to death, and as long as they can do some work for the Nazis, they were still alive. They had one portion of some watery soup and a piece of bread a day, and they suffered from disease and malnutrition and horrible things, and then they were exterminated. So as a child, I heard these stories, and I had images of how horrible it must be if I ever go to Auschwitz, what I will suffer, how I was terrified. I knew that it was hell. So there was this constant living with the awareness of something terrible is awaiting me, and my mother and my father, my sister, everybody around me. But when we got to Warsaw, we were given, everybody during the war there had to have identity papers with your photograph on it and stating what religion you are. It was compulsory. where you were born, what your name is, what religion you are, etc., etc. Of course, if you put Jewish religion, it was passing a death sentence on yourself. So we got false names. I had to be called something else than I really was called from birth. My mother had a different name. My sister had a different name. And my sister had a name that was not of the same family as my mother and myself on these false papers. So we had to be separated because she looked... Can we have a picture of the three of us? These are the three of us, my mother, my sister, and myself. And you can see a great similarity in the faces. You could tell that there is that we are of one family. But her details on her papers, they were all false, but said that she was born somewhere completely different. She had a different name. She had a different parents. So she had, at that point, she was, I think she was about 16. She had to go to a separate place in Warsaw, but she went to be a servant in somebody's house. And we could only meet very occasionally, unseen by other people, because it would throw suspicion on us. There is something funny. These three, the two girls and the woman, look so alike. How come they are not related? So she had to be separate, yes. But my mother and myself were together because we had papers with the same surname and actually even the same Christian name. And I had learned basic behavior of a Christian child. I learned how to go to church, how to, Poland is Catholic. 99% of Poland is of the Catholic religion. So there are certain rules of behavior in a Catholic church which are somewhat different to an Anglican church. I learned how to walk into the church, how to cross myself. I learned the prayers. I learned virtually to behave like a little Catholic girl. I tell you something interesting. At one point, yes, and my mother was advised to take on the position of a servant with some, Warsaw was the capital city and the wealthiest people lived in Warsaw. And they still, even during the war, they would have servants. They would have help at home or living in servants. And my mother was advised that the best place for her the safest place to find a position as a servant in one of these elegant homes, so that people wouldn't pay any attention to us and nobody would start suspecting that maybe we are not what we are pretending to be. So my mother found a place with a young family where there was a couple who had a little boy of about 2 and a newborn baby. And she was cleaning and cooking and doing things and looking after the children, and I was with her. But at some point, a suspicion arose from somewhere. Somebody began to suspect. My mother didn't quite look like a proverbial simple woman from the country used to be a servant. And I was with a group of children, and one of the girls in that group was the daughter of a policeman. And I think that this policeman began suspecting something about us, that we are not quite what we pretend to be. And he set on the child to test me, because we were sort of playing, and at one point she pulled me aside and she said, tell me, I wouldn't tell anybody, are you Jewish? And I pretended that I didn't hear it. And I ran off and did something else. And I was absolutely terrified, because if I had admitted, I would have been exposed to be taken to execution. And I didn't tell my mother that this happened. I was so frightened. I didn't want to upset her. But I was absolutely terrified. And in this state, I went to the church. And in a Catholic church, there are sort of chapels for different saints. And I chose a chapel of a saint called Saint Teresa. And I knelt in front of her picture, and I prayed to her to save us. Absolutely sincerely. Very many years later, I was already living in this country, actually here in Northwood, and a member of this synagogue, and married to an Englishman. We went to Spain to celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary with my husband. And one of the places that we had booked to visit was a place called Avila, in the center of Spain. And when we got to it, there was a vast statue of Saint Teresa. She was the saint born and living in Avila, and she established a famous convent there, and she became a very outstanding personality in the Catholic Church. And I remember my heart stopped for a moment, and I said to my husband, she was my saint. I prayed to her to save us. Well, we returned from that journey, and I mentioned it to our rabbi who looks after the congregation of this synagogue. And I said, I told him this story. And he sort of listened, didn't say anything. And a week later, I came to a service, and he called me and he said, Nelly, here's a book for you. And he handed me a book, The Life of Saint Teresa. So I laughed. I said, well, a rabbi giving me a book about a Catholic saint? He said, yes, we are eclectic here. And I started reading the book. She was a very extraordinary woman. And I discovered that she was the granddaughter of a Spanish Jew who was, the history of the Jews in Europe is pretty interesting and complex. But at the end of the 16th century, in 1592, there was an inquisition against Jews and Muslims in Spain. And they either were made to convert to Christianity, or they were burned on stake, or they ran away. Saint Teresa of Avila, one of the great saints of the Catholic Church, happens to be the granddaughter of a so-called converso. Her grandfather was a Jew, and he was forced to convert. And his granddaughter became one of the great saints of the Catholic Church. And it was so extraordinary that as a little girl, of all the different saints, I chose her to pray to her to save us. I'm just telling you this as again, another interesting point in how we are blinded by fixed ideas. Well, I could, of course, stand here and talk for at least 3 hours about many details, many frightening and some remarkable moments in the life during those years. But I'll stop at this point, and I would like to read to you a prayer which was, we have services, we the Jewish people honored the Sabbath, and the Sabbath starts on the preceding evening. So the Friday night is sort of the welcoming of the Sabbath, which comes on the Saturday. And I came to the service last Friday, and there was a prayer read, which I then spoke to the rabbi, to our minister, and I said, you know, I would like to read this prayer to the people who will come to whom I'll be talking today. Would you like to get up, please? Oh Lord, open up our eyes, teach us how to live. Fill our hearts with joy and all the love you have to give. Gather us in peace as you lead us to your name. And we will know that you are one. And we will know that we are one. And we will know that all is one. Amen. Thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful, this.
I said in my introduction that this was going to be a remarkable story, and I'm sure you'll all agree with me. It has been a truly remarkable and awe-inspiring story. I'm sure you have lots of questions, and Nelly has very kindly said she would be happy to answer your questions. The one thing I would ask is that when you do ask a question, if you could just stand up and say your name, that would be lovely. And there will be people coming around with a microphone so we can all hear your question. So, who's got a question? Can I have a show of hands? Lovely, we've got one over here. That's terrific. And we've got one over here in a moment.
And
Thank
one
you.
over there. Oh.
Oh dear. It's Riyadh. And also, you know, when all this happened, did they shave off like all your hair, or did they leave it on?
This they did in the camp.
Did it?
Luckily, I didn't get into the camp.
Okay.
Yes, you heard about that.
Yeah.
And they took all their possessions away. They took their clothes. They put them in these sort of camp pajamas and shaved their heads. Yeah. No, in the ghetto, no, we were in our own clothes, but we had nothing else, including, of course, no food.
We've got one question here, we've got two there, and we've got one there.
Oh. And another there. Yes. Good.
I'm Aidan, and I was just wondering if you knew, like, whether this was going to end when it was all happening. Did you know whether it would end, or did you think this was going to be, like, permanent?
It's a wonderful question. We had no idea. We just hoped that it wasn't going to end with our death, but it could have happened at any moment, and we had no idea that there was going to be an end to it. Very interesting question.
Hi, I'm Isaac. I have kind of two questions. First of all, did you actually find out what happened to your father? Like, what actually happened to him?
I only have a written statement by a man who knew that my father was taken to that, he gave the name of that place, and it was known to be previously a prison, and under the Nazis it became a sort of torture place and extermination. They would torture people there up to death.
And also, what happened to your sister after?
Yes. Well, my sister, you remember I said that when we escaped to Warsaw, she became somebody else. She had other papers, and we would occasionally just sort of meet, hiding from view of other people who knew us. And and she worked as a mother's help, as a servant, with a young couple who were just expecting their first baby. And the baby arrived, and she was helping them. And when we eventually, we were liberated by the Russian army that conquered the Germans and pushed them out of Poland. And then we made contact with my sister. She survived.
We've got one there and then yes.
That's lovely. Lots of them want to ask.
When you were on the train, was your sister with you?
No, my sister was already, before that, she was sent by this doctor who saved us to Warsaw, ahead of us. And we just knew where she was. We could contact her when we came to Warsaw. Yes.
I'm Joe, and my question was, what was your name that you were given as your false identity?
Oh, okay, I'll tell you. My original name, my father's surname was Podhorets. His name was Leon Podhorets, and my original name was Nelly Podhorets. Actually, Jewish families had a Hebrew name for a child, and also the name of known throughout the country. So my sort of Polish name was Nelly, but my Hebrew name that was given to me by my Jewish parents was Nechama, which in Hebrew means consolation. Rather interesting. So the family name was Podhorets. That had to be hidden out of the way. And on the false papers, I have a very complicated Polish name, Zachaczewska, and the first name, the Christian name, was Aniela, which derives from the word angel. Imagine, I'm consolation and angel, all in one. But this is, so I learned to call myself Aniela Zachaczewska. And even when the war ended, these were the only papers we had. So I immediately, when I went to school, I went under that Polish name. And the name only changed when 5 years after the war ended, my mother and myself emigrated to the State of Israel. And there I acquired a name which wasn't put on here, but which I am known under. As you were told, I'm actually a professional pianist, and my professional name is Nelly Ben Or, which is a Hebrew name. And Kleins is the name, is my husband's name. So I'm Mrs. Kleins, but I'm also known as Miss Ben Or professionally as a pianist. Ah, yes. This is all in Polish, you see. How do you translate it? It's a document showing my mother, where we lived, Katowice. This was after the war. It's a regional Jewish committee in the town of Katowice, and my mother there, Podhorets Antonina, and in brackets Zachaczewska Aniela Maria. So the Polish sounding, the name in brackets was from the false papers, which saved us from being executed. Yes, we have further questions.
We've only got time for one more question, but we've had somebody waving very patiently.
The boy with the glasses was waving, yes. Oh, that's kind of you.
I wanted to ask whether in the ghettos there were any Nazi officers that were quite hesitant to do anything bad to anyone in the ghetto.
I'm afraid that once they were, their function was to deal with the ghetto situation, they had not a grain of sympathy. They were all very, very strongly conditioned to be killers. Child, woman, men, everybody. No, compassion was not on their list. That was the tragedy. That was a great tragedy.
I'm really sorry that we haven't got more time for questions, but I think the fact, Nelly, that there are so many people who wanted to ask questions is a true reflection on how interested everybody has been.
Yes.
And I think there's a little something there for you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. How lovely. Thank you. Well, I do hope that you will reflect that it isn't simply a story. There are lots of stories. Lots of people have stories of their lives, but I always wish it to be something that makes you young people think for yourself and judge what is truly important in our lives, in your future life.
Thank you. And now we're going to be handing out some blank postcards, and it's an opportunity for you to write a few words to Nelly about what you have gained from this afternoon, what you have heard, what you have seen, something that's really touched you, that you would like to communicate to Nelly on card. And I can assure you that she will treasure the words that you write on your cards. So our volunteers are now going to hand out blank postcards. Please address it to Nelly and then just share 1 or 2 sentences for the next 3 or 4 minutes what you would like to say to Nelly.